All right, so stocks, as you can see, are higher today, but more troubling news on the economy as the IMF slashed its U.S. growth forecast. What does that mean for your investments, and how should you strategize from here? Let's ask Stanley Crouch, Chief Investment Officer at Aegis Capital Management. Welcome to you. It's so great to have you in studio this afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So the IMF lowering its outlook on the U.S., that's troubling. We know the U.S. economy has been languishing for a while now. Why do you think the IMF stepped in now, and what does it say about where we go from here?
Well, I think that's interesting in terms of forecasting in and of itself, which is an inexact science. It's sort of a hybrid between art and science. I think the economists at the IMF got confirmation of what their models show to be an actual portending of a slowdown, as opposed to the administration of the IMF, which is more on the political realm and working within the system. But it also points out that forecasting is just perilous, particularly as event risks permeate. And we've seen that kind of volatility, particularly the last couple of weeks and even in a couple of months.
A couple of years. Wondering if you think the financial crisis and the credit freeze back in 2008, are we still dealing with the after effects from that? And it's interesting because we look at our economy here in the U.S. and we also report on the European sovereign debt crisis impacting and the contagion threatening U.S. markets. But it's really a global picture now. And, does it all stem from those events a couple of years ago?
Sure, and it even goes back further than that. In my estimation, everything changed once we really became a globalized economy, and I think the seminal moment in that event was the establishment of the WTO, World Trade Organization, which supplanted the GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades. Once that happened, and GATT had been in place for decades, once that happened, we changed everything. Now, when we followed that on with the deregulation of the banking system, and then as we got integrated internationally, and then everything went from there. Also, easy money fueled a credit bubble, more and more products, derivatives, and that's what got us in. It all came apart. Now, we're suffering from the continuing aftermath. The real question is, have we entered, or are we well into, what I like to call a decade of inevitability? That's the real question. Because how does that knock on, as is popular to say, affect everything? And I think it does affect everything. So it seems obvious that the IMF would lower their outlook.
Okay, that's an interesting background explanation. The goal here, though, is to coordinate central banks and to coordinate economies and governments. No, it's kind of what I'm gathering from you a little bit? Because it really is a global picture now. You can't look at, the different bar stools acting independently.
Absolutely. That's critical. Because you can't have globalized systems and then have a parochial or independent country-by-country approach or central bank by central bank approach. It doesn't make any sense. We've got to get back to common sense. Now, it's not politically palatable in either environment, whether it be Europe or the U.S. With our election coming up, I think Monday was a seminal moment when the president brought out the tax policy and the immediate response was negative, and another plan from the Republican side. But the point of it is the Europeans also have this political dysfunction. Until there's agreement and central banks act in a coordinated fashion, which they did to provide liquidity to the European banks in dollars when the money market shut down, or almost shut down. The point being, it's a global problem. It has to be a global solution.
Are you globally invested?
Well, what we do is we stick, since we just admit that we can't know, because no one knows. There is not one economist, outside of a few outliers who were considered kooky at the time, somebody like Roger Bootle at Capital, who called any of this going back. So, since economists have been wholly wrong about everything, interest rates, direction of the markets, etc., in general, and some of them have, let's say, self-fulfilling interests from wherever they come from, the point being that since that's the case, then we don't really know. And there's event risk, which is, in my almost 28 years, is more prevalent than ever. Therefore, the only thing that we can think of doing that makes sense is producing income in all the portfolios and then letting the mathematical effect, which is a certainty of compounding, take over, and eventually we'll get that exponential curve in asset creation over time.
Income securities, out of time. But that was an interesting discussion. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much, Stanley Crouch.
Thank you.